The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as William paced the length of his private study, his footsteps echoing against the ancient stone walls. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier than it did in this moment, when family loyalty clashed with duty to the realm. Outside his window, the grounds stretched endlessly, manicured lawns giving way to forests that had witnessed centuries of royal drama. Yet none of those historical moments seemed to compare to the decision he now faced. Camilla had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The reports from his security detail were damning, each page more troubling than the last. For months, there had been whispers, subtle signs that something was amiss in the carefully orchestrated world of royal protocol. Palace staff had noticed unusual meetings, hushed conversations that ended abruptly when others entered the room, and, most concerning of all, unauthorized communications with individuals whose loyalties to the crown were questionable at best. The evidence had been building like a storm on the horizon. Financial irregularities in accounts she had access to, classified information that somehow found its way to tabloid journalists, and a pattern of behavior that suggested a deliberate undermining of royal security measures. William had hoped against hope that there would be some reasonable explanation, some misunderstanding that could be clarified with a simple conversation. But the final piece of evidence had arrived that very morning, delivered by the head of palace security with a grim expression that spoke volumes before he even opened the sealed envelope. Inside were photographs, communication records, and witness statements that painted a picture of systematic betrayal. Camilla had been feeding information to hostile foreign contacts, accepting payments through a complex network of shell companies, and using her position within the royal household to access state secrets that she had no business knowing. The scope of her activities was staggering, reaching back years into the past, suggesting a level of planning and deception that chilled William to his core. As Prince of Wales, William had always known that difficult decisions would be part of his birthright. He had been prepared for political challenges, constitutional crises, and the endless balancing act between tradition and modernization that defined contemporary monarchy. But nothing had prepared him for this moment, when the person who had become such an integral part of their family structure revealed herself to be a threat to everything they represented. The irony was not lost on him that Camilla had once been the source of such controversy within the family, her relationship with his father causing years of public scrutiny and private anguish. There had been a time when William himself had harbored deep reservations about her place in their lives, struggling to reconcile his loyalty to his mother's memory with the reality of his father's happiness. Over the years, those reservations had gradually given way to acceptance, then genuine affection, as Camilla proved herself to be a stabilizing force in his father's life and a caring stepmother figure. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Camilla had thrown herself into royal duties with unexpected enthusiasm, supporting numerous charities with genuine passion and representing the crown with dignity at countless public engagements. She had navigated the complex web of royal protocol with grace, earning the respect of palace staff and the grudging admiration of even her harshest critics. Most importantly, she had made his father happy in a way that William had not seen since his mother's death. But now, all of those positive memories felt tainted by the knowledge of her true activities. Every charitable engagement took on a sinister cast when viewed through the lens of potential intelligence gathering. Every private family moment seemed compromised by the possibility that sensitive information was being cataloged and transmitted to unknown recipients. The violation felt personal and political simultaneously, a betrayal that cut to the heart of everything William held dear. The security briefing had been conducted in the underground bunker beneath Buckingham Palace, a room designed to withstand nuclear attack, but feeling inadequate to contain the explosive nature of the revelations being shared. The head of MI5 had presented the evidence with clinical precision, each document carefully authenticated, each connection meticulously verified. There was no room for doubt, no alternative interpretation that could soften the harsh reality of what Camilla had become. The Foreign Intelligence Service she had been working with was known for its sophisticated recruitment techniques, often targeting individuals with access to sensitive information through a combination of financial incentives and psychological manipulation. The amounts involved were substantial, far beyond what anyone might need for personal expenses, suggesting that greed rather than ideology had been her primary motivation. The systematic nature of the information she had provided indicated training in intelligence gathering techniques, pointing to a level of professional involvement that spoke to years of careful cultivation. What made the situation even more complex was the timing. King Charles's health had been a source of private concern within the family for months, though the public remained largely unaware of the extent of his medical challenges. The stress of dealing with this crisis could potentially accelerate his decline, creating a constitutional crisis at the worst possible moment. William found himself caught between his duty to protect state secrets and his desire to shield his father from additional trauma. The decision to act had been made easier by the urgency of the threat. Intelligence services had detected increased activity in Camilla's communication patterns, suggesting that something significant was being planned. The risk of allowing her to remain in her position for even another day was deemed unacceptable by security professionals who had devoted their careers to protecting the crown. The time for gentle intervention had passed. Dramatic action was now the only option. William's military background had taught him the importance of decisive action when faced with clear and present danger. His service with the RAF had instilled in him a deep appreciation for the chain of command and the necessity of making difficult decisions under pressure. Those lessons served him well now as he contemplated the orders he was about to give, orders that would fundamentally alter the royal family's dynamic and send shockwaves through the establishment. The conversation with his father had been the most difficult of his life. Charles had initially refused to believe the evidence, dismissing it as a misunderstanding or a malicious fabrication by those who had never accepted Camilla's place in the family. It had taken hours of careful presentation, with security officials providing additional context and corroborating evidence, before the king finally accepted the devastating reality of his wife's betrayal. The moment of realization had been heartbreaking to witness. Charles had aged years in a matter of minutes, his face crumpling as the full implications of the situation became clear. The woman he loved and trusted had been systematically betraying not just him personally, but the institution he had spent his entire life preparing to lead. The personal and political dimensions of the crisis were impossible to separate, each feeding into the other in a destructive spiral that threatened to consume everything in its path. Security protocols had been immediately activated, with Camilla's access to sensitive areas of the palace quietly restricted while plans were developed for her confrontation and removal. The operation required careful coordination between multiple agencies, each with their own concerns and priorities. The Metropolitan Police's protection unit needed to be briefed on potential threats to public order, while MI5 coordinated with international partners to assess the broader implications of the intelligence breach. The media management aspect of the crisis was perhaps the most challenging element to navigate. Any leak of information about Camilla's activities would create a feeding frenzy that could destabilize the monarchy for generations. Palace communications specialists worked around the clock to develop contingency plans for various scenarios, each more troubling than the last. The goal was to contain the situation as much as possible while ensuring that justice was served and security protocols were restored. As evening approached, William found himself standing in the same study where he had begun this terrible day, but everything had changed. The decision had been made, the orders given, and the machinery of royal justice set in motion. In a few hours, Camilla would be confronted with the evidence of her crimes and given the choice between voluntary departure and forcible removal. Given her personality and the magnitude of her betrayal, William had little doubt which option she would choose. The guards who would carry out the operation were handpicked for their loyalty and discretion, veterans of the Royal Protection Service who understood the gravity of their task. They had been briefed on the need for absolute confidentiality and the importance of treating the situation with the dignity that the office of Queen Consort demanded, even in its final hours. The protocol called for her to be given the opportunity to pack essential belongings and arrange for transportation, but her access to communication devices would be strictly monitored to prevent any attempts at destroying evidence or alerting accomplices. The night ahead would be long and difficult for everyone involved. William knew that this decision would haunt him for the rest of his life, regardless of its necessity. The woman who had brought his father such happiness was about to become a painful memory, her legacy forever tainted by her choices. The institution of monarchy would survive, as it had survived countless crises throughout its long history, but the personal cost would be immeasurable. Standing at his window, watching the last light fade from the western sky, William prepared himself for what was to come. The orders had been given, and there could be no turning back. By morning, Camilla would be gone, and the royal family would begin the long process of healing from this most intimate of betrayals. The crown demanded nothing less than absolute loyalty, and when that loyalty was compromised, swift and decisive action was the only option. Tonight, justice would be served, regardless of the personal cost to those who loved and trusted the woman who had chosen to betray them all. The clock tower of Windsor Castle chimed 11 times as Camilla finished her evening routine, unaware that her world was about to collapse around her. She had spent the evening reviewing correspondence for her upcoming charitable engagements, maintaining the facade of normalcy that had served her so well over the past months. The Queen Consort's apartments were quiet except for the soft ticking of antique clocks and the distant sound of security patrols making their rounds through the castle corridors. In the adjoining room, her personal protection officer received a coded message on his secure communication device. The instruction was brief, but unmistakable. Maintain standard protocol until further notice, then withdraw to a predetermined location. The changing of the guard was about to take on an entirely different meaning, one that would mark the end of an era and the beginning of a constitutional crisis that would reverberate through the monarchy for generations to come. Camilla had always prided herself on her ability to read the subtle currents of palace politics, but she had failed to detect the investigation that had been quietly building around her for months. The security services had been remarkably thorough in their surveillance, using techniques developed for counterintelligence operations to track her movements and communications without alerting her to their presence. Every phone call had been monitored, every meeting observed, every financial transaction scrutinized with the methodical precision of professionals who understood the gravity of their task. The evidence against her was overwhelming, but what made her situation truly hopeless was the systematic nature of her activities. This was not a case of momentary weakness or a single lapse in judgment that might be forgiven or overlooked. The intelligence services had documented years of deliberate espionage, carefully planned operations designed to extract maximum value from her unprecedented access to royal family secrets and state information. Her recruitment had begun innocuously enough, with what appeared to be routine social contacts in her role as queen consort. Foreign diplomats and cultural attaches had cultivated relationships with her through seemingly innocent charitable connections and cultural exchanges. The process had been so gradual, so carefully orchestrated, that she might have convinced herself that she was simply being friendly and diplomatically engaged. But the payments that followed, the specific requests for information, and the sophisticated communication methods she employed told a different story entirely. The financial trail was particularly damning. Bank records showed regular deposits from shell companies with connections to hostile intelligence services, amounts that far exceeded any legitimate consulting fees or charitable donations she might have received. The money had been carefully laundered through a network of international accounts, suggesting professional money laundering expertise that pointed to state-level involvement in her recruitment and handling. What made her betrayal even more painful for the royal family was the personal information she had provided to her handlers. Details about King Charles's health that had been shared in confidence, information about internal family discussions regarding succession planning, and insights into the personal relationships and private concerns of senior royals. She had systematically violated the trust that had been placed in her, turning intimate family moments into intelligence products for foreign consumption. The scope of her access had been extraordinary, even by royal standards. As queen consort, she had been privy to state papers, diplomatic correspondence, and security briefings that would have been invaluable to hostile intelligence services. Her presence at private meetings between the king and senior government officials had given her access to information about military deployments, diplomatic initiatives, and economic policies that could have provided significant advantages to Britain's adversaries. The technical aspects of her espionage activities revealed a level of sophistication that spoke to professional training and ongoing support from experienced intelligence operatives. She had used encrypted communication applications that were regularly updated with new security protocols, suggesting active technical support from her handlers. Dead drop locations had been established throughout London, allowing for the secure transfer of information without direct contact that might be detected by surveillance. Perhaps most troubling was the evidence that she had attempted to recruit others within the royal household. Staff members had been approached with seemingly innocent requests for information, offers of financial assistance for personal problems, and subtle pressure to provide access to areas of the palace that were normally restricted. While none of these recruitment attempts appeared to have been successful, they demonstrated an ambition and audacity that suggested she viewed her espionage activities as a long-term career rather than a temporary arrangement. The psychological profile developed by intelligence services painted a picture of someone who had gradually lost sight of the boundary between public duty and personal gain. The initial motivation appeared to have been financial, driven by lifestyle expectations that exceeded even the substantial resources available to a queen consort. The amounts offered by her intelligence handlers had been carefully calibrated to exploit her weaknesses while ensuring her continued cooperation. As the evening progressed, the final pieces of the operation against her were falling into place. Security teams had positioned themselves throughout the castle, with backup units standing by at strategic locations to prevent any attempt at escape or the destruction of evidence. Communications monitoring had been intensified to detect any attempt to alert her handlers or accomplices to the impending operation. The decision about timing had been carefully considered by William and his security advisors. Evening offered the advantage of reduced staff presence in the royal apartments, minimizing the number of witnesses to what would inevitably be a dramatic and traumatic confrontation. The cover of darkness would also provide additional security for the operation, reducing the risk of media observation or public disturbance that could compromise the investigation. William himself had struggled with whether to be present for the confrontation, ultimately deciding that his duty as heir to the throne required him to witness the consequences of the orders he had given. The decision to remove Camilla was his responsibility, and he felt obligated to ensure that it was carried out with the dignity befitting her former position, even in the face of her betrayal. The legal framework for her removal had been carefully researched by palace legal advisors working in coordination with government solicitors. The situation was without precedent in modern royal history, requiring the development of new protocols that balanced the need for swift action with the constitutional requirements surrounding the treatment of a queen consort. The goal was to avoid any legal challenges that might complicate the situation or provide her with opportunities to delay her removal. The evidence that would be presented to her during the confrontation had been organized with prosecutorial precision. Each document had been authenticated by forensic specialists, every communication transcript verified through multiple sources, and every financial record confirmed through international banking cooperation. The case against her was airtight, designed to prevent any possibility of denial or deflection that might prolong the process. Intelligence services had also prepared for the possibility that she might attempt to flee the country or seek asylum with her foreign handlers. Coordination with international partners had resulted in travel restrictions being quietly implemented, while surveillance teams had been positioned at airports and other potential departure points. The goal was to ensure that she remained available for questioning and potential prosecution while preventing her from accessing foreign intelligence resources that might help her evade justice. The impact on King Charles had been devastating to witness. The man who had waited so long to assume the throne, who had finally found personal happiness after decades of public scrutiny and private pain, now faced the destruction of everything he held dear. The stress of the situation had taken a visible toll on his health, raising concerns among his medical team about the potential for serious complications. The broader implications for the monarchy were equally troubling. Public confidence in the institution had already been shaken by various scandals in recent years, and the revelation that a queen consort had been systematically betraying state secrets threatened to undermine the entire foundation of public trust that the crown depended upon. The constitutional questions raised by her activities would require careful navigation by legal scholars and government officials for months or years to come. As midnight approached, the final authorization codes were transmitted to the security teams positioned throughout the castle. The operation was about to begin, marking the end of Camilla's time as queen consort, and the beginning of what would undoubtedly be one of the most challenging periods in recent royal history. The guards who would carry out William's orders were professional and experienced, but even they understood the historical significance of what they were about to do. The woman who had once been embraced by the public as a stabilizing influence on King Charles, who had gradually won over even her harshest critics through years of dedicated service, was about to be revealed as a threat to national security. The transformation from beloved royal family member to accused traitor would shock the nation and reverberate through the Commonwealth, forever changing how the public viewed the institution of monarchy. In her private apartment, Camilla continued her evening routine, perhaps sensing that something was different, but not yet understanding the magnitude of the storm that was about to break around her. Within hours, her carefully constructed life would be in ruins, her reputation destroyed, and her freedom potentially forfeit. The price of betraying the crown was about to be paid in full, and there would be no possibility of redemption or return. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight as three figures in dark suits moved silently through the corridors of Windsor Castle. Their footsteps were muffled by centuries-old Persian runners, their movements coordinated with military precision. Each man carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to handling the most delicate and dangerous situations that could threaten the crown. Tonight, they were about to confront a threat that came from within the very heart of the royal family itself. Detective Chief Inspector Harrison led the small team, his 20 years of experience with the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Protection Unit having prepared him for many extraordinary situations, but nothing quite like this. Behind him walked Commander Welsh of the Royal Protection Service and Inspector Davies from the Counterterrorism Division. Each man had been personally selected by William himself, their loyalty to the crown beyond question, their discretion absolute. The intelligence briefing they had received earlier that evening had been unlike anything in their collective experience. The evidence against Camilla was not just substantial. It was overwhelming to the point of being almost incomprehensible. How had someone in her position, with every advantage that life could offer, chosen to betray not just her family, but her entire country? The psychological dimensions of her crimes would be studied by intelligence professionals for years to come. As they approached the Queen Consort's private apartments, Harrison reviewed the protocol one final time in his mind. The confrontation would be conducted with the dignity befitting her former status, but there could be no compromise on security. Her access to communication devices had already been quietly disabled, her internet connections severed, and her ability to contact the outside world effectively eliminated. The goal was to prevent any possibility of evidence destruction or attempts to alert her intelligence handlers to the compromised operation. The apartment's sitting room was elegantly appointed with antiques and artwork that represented centuries of royal collecting. Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors, and oil paintings of previous monarchs gazed down from their gilded frames. It was in this setting of ultimate privilege and refinement that one of the most shocking betrayals in royal history was about to be exposed. Camilla looked up from her book as the three men entered, her expression initially one of mild surprise rather than alarm. She had become accustomed to irregular security briefings and protocol adjustments during her time as Queen Consort, and her first assumption was that this was simply another routine matter requiring her attention. The gravity of the situation only began to dawn on her as she noticed the formal expressions on their faces and the manila folders they carried. Harrison spoke first, his voice carefully controlled and professional. The words he had rehearsed dozens of times during the drive to Windsor now seemed inadequate to the magnitude of the moment. He informed her that serious allegations had been made regarding her activities, allegations that threatened national security and required immediate investigation. The careful phrasing was designed to provide her with an opportunity to cooperate voluntarily while making clear that cooperation was not optional. The transformation in Camilla's expression was remarkable to witness. Confusion gave way to understanding, understanding to panic, and panic to a desperate attempt at maintaining innocence. Her denials came rapidly, each one more emphatic than the last, but the experienced officers could see the calculation behind her eyes as she evaluated her options and found them all wanting. Commander Welsh opened the first folder and began laying out photographs across the mahogany coffee table that had served countless royal family members over the decades. Each image told part of the story of her betrayal. Surveillance photographs showing her at clandestine meetings, copies of encrypted communications between her and foreign intelligence operatives, bank records documenting the substantial payments she had received for her services. The financial evidence was particularly damning. Welsh explained how investigators had traced a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts that ultimately led back to intelligence services hostile to British interests. The amounts involved were staggering, totaling hundreds of thousands of pounds over the course of several years. This was not a case of momentary weakness or financial desperation. It was systematic, professional espionage conducted at the highest levels of government. Camilla's attempts to explain away the evidence became increasingly frantic as the full scope of the investigation became clear. She claimed that the meetings had been innocent social encounters, that the money had been legitimate consulting fees for charitable work, that the communications had been misunderstood or taken out of context. But each explanation was systematically dismantled by evidence that had been gathered with forensic precision. Inspector Davies presented perhaps the most devastating piece of evidence: recorded conversations between Camilla and her intelligence handlers. The recordings had been obtained through legal surveillance operations that had been ongoing for months, carefully documented and authenticated to ensure their admissibility in any future legal proceedings. Her voice was clearly identifiable as she discussed state secrets, royal family dynamics, and confidential government policies with individuals who were known foreign intelligence operatives. The content of those conversations was shocking in its detail and scope. Camilla had provided information about King Charles's health that was not known to the public, details about succession planning that could have been used to destabilize the monarchy, and insights into government policy discussions that could have provided significant advantages to Britain's adversaries in international negotiations. Perhaps most personally devastating were the recordings where she discussed intimate details of royal family relationships and private conversations. She had systematically violated the trust that had been placed in her, turning family dinners and private moments into intelligence products for foreign consumption. The betrayal was both political and deeply personal, cutting to the heart of everything the royal family represented. As the evidence mounted, Camilla's demeanor shifted from denial to defiance. She argued that her activities had been mischaracterized, that she had been entrapped by sophisticated intelligence operatives who had exploited her desire to help charitable causes and promote international understanding. But the systematic nature of her activities, documented over several years, made such explanations impossible to sustain. The psychological pressure of the confrontation was intense, but Harrison and his team maintained their professional composure throughout. They had been trained to handle high-stakes interrogations involving individuals with significant power and influence, and they understood the importance of following proper procedures even under extraordinary circumstances. William's written authorization for her removal was presented as the final element of the confrontation. The document, bearing his seal and signature, ordered her immediate departure from all royal residences and the revocation of her access to state facilities and classified information. The language was formal and legalistic, but the meaning was unmistakable. Her time as queen consort was over, effective immediately. The legal implications of her activities were explained in detail by Inspector Davies, who had extensive experience with national security cases. The charges she faced were serious, potentially including violations of the Official Secrets Act, conspiracy to commit espionage, and treason. The penalties for such crimes could include lengthy prison sentences, and there was little doubt that the evidence would support successful prosecution. Camilla's response to the legal briefing revealed the calculated nature of her activities. Rather than expressing remorse or attempting to minimize her actions, she began negotiating for the best possible outcome for herself. She offered to provide information about her intelligence handlers and their operations in exchange for more lenient treatment, demonstrating that her loyalty could be purchased by the highest bidder. The counterintelligence implications of her activities were staggering. For years, hostile intelligence services had been receiving detailed information about the inner workings of the British government and royal family from someone with unparalleled access. The damage assessment would take months to complete, requiring careful review of every decision that might have been influenced by compromised information. The impact on international relationships was equally serious. Allied intelligence services would need to be informed about the security breach, potentially compromising operations, and relationships that had taken decades to develop. The trust that was fundamental to intelligence cooperation had been violated in the most serious way possible. As the confrontation continued, it became clear that Camilla had no intention of accepting responsibility for her actions or cooperating with the investigation unless it served her own interests. Her primary concern appeared to be minimizing the consequences for herself rather than understanding the damage she had caused to the institution she had sworn to serve. The security team prepared to implement the next phase of the operation, her physical removal from the royal residence. The protocol called for her to be given the opportunity to pack essential belongings under supervision, but her access to communication devices and computers would remain restricted to prevent any attempts at evidence destruction or contact with accomplices. The night that had begun with hopes for voluntary cooperation was clearly heading toward a more confrontational conclusion. Camilla's refusal to accept the gravity of her situation or show genuine remorse made it impossible to resolve the matter through negotiation. The guards who would escort her from the premises were already in position, waiting for the order that would mark the end of one of the most extraordinary chapters in recent royal history. The woman who had spent years cultivating an image as a devoted servant of the crown was about to be revealed as its betrayer, and the consequences of that revelation would reverberate through the monarchy and the nation for years to come. The price of her treachery was about to be paid in full, and there would be no possibility of redemption or return to the life of privilege she had chosen to abandon for money and the thrill of espionage. The atmosphere in the Queen Consort's apartment had grown increasingly tense as Camilla's defiance hardened into open hostility. What had begun as a professional interrogation was rapidly deteriorating into a confrontation that would require the physical intervention that everyone had hoped to avoid. Her refusal to cooperate voluntarily left Harrison and his team with no alternative but to implement the more forceful measures that William's authorization had made possible. Commander Welsh stepped forward to explain the immediate consequences of her non-cooperation. The evidence against her was sufficient to justify her immediate arrest and removal from royal premises, and her continued residence in Windsor Castle posed an unacceptable security risk. The decision had been made at the highest levels of government and the royal household that she could no longer be permitted to remain in her current position. Camilla's response was swift and vicious. Years of carefully maintained public composure evaporated as she launched into a verbal attack against William, King Charles, and the entire royal establishment. Her words revealed depths of resentment and calculation that shocked even the experienced security professionals who had seen the evidence of her crimes. She spoke of the royal family as if they were her enemies rather than the people who had welcomed her into their most intimate circle. The personal attacks were particularly devastating because they revealed the true nature of her feelings toward the family that had embraced her. She spoke contemptuously of King Charles's weaknesses and health problems, dismissing him as a pathetic figure who had been easily manipulated by her superior intelligence and sophistication. Her characterization of William as an arrogant and entitled heir who lacked the wisdom to lead the monarchy was delivered with such venom that it made clear how deeply she had resented his growing influence within the family. Inspector Davies recognized the psychological pattern from his experience with other cases involving long-term deception. Camilla was exhibiting the classic behavior of someone whose carefully constructed facade had finally collapsed, revealing the authentic personality that had been hidden beneath years of public performance. The loving stepmother and devoted queen consort had been an elaborate act designed to serve her own purposes. Her attempts to justify her espionage activities became increasingly desperate as the conversation continued. She claimed that she had been providing valuable services to promote international understanding and prevent conflicts that could have threatened global stability. The sophistication of her arguments suggested that she had spent considerable time developing rationalizations for her betrayal, probably with the assistance of her intelligence handlers who would have wanted to ensure her psychological commitment to their cause. The financial motivations for her activities became clearer as she attempted to explain her lifestyle and expenses. Despite the substantial resources available to a queen consort, Camilla had developed tastes and habits that exceeded even those generous allowances. Private jets for personal travel, exclusive shopping expeditions to international fashion capitals, and elaborate entertainment for friends and associates had created financial pressures that made the payments from foreign intelligence services increasingly attractive. But the money was only part of the story. As the interrogation progressed, it became evident that Camilla had also been motivated by the intellectual challenge and excitement of espionage work. She spoke with obvious pride about her ability to extract information from royal family members and government officials without arousing suspicion. The thrill of operating a double life had provided her with a sense of power and control that her public role as queen consort could never match. The sophisticated tradecraft she had employed was revealed through her own admissions as much as through the evidence already collected. She had been trained in surveillance detection, secure communications, and the psychological techniques needed to elicit information from targets without alerting them to her true purposes. The level of her training suggested that her recruitment had been a long-term project rather than an opportunistic exploitation of her position. Her intelligence handlers had been remarkably patient and thorough in their development of her as an asset. The recruitment process had begun years before her marriage to King Charles, when she was still viewed as simply a long-term companion rather than a potential queen consort. The Foreign Intelligence Service had recognized her potential value early and had invested considerable resources in ensuring her loyalty and effectiveness. The technical aspects of her espionage activities were revealed through detailed questioning about her methods and procedures. She had used multiple communication channels to maintain contact with her handlers, including encrypted messaging applications, dead-drop locations throughout London, and sophisticated financial arrangements that allowed for secure payments without creating obvious audit trails. Her ability to access classified information had been extraordinary, even by the standards of someone in her position. Royal family members and senior government officials had shared sensitive information with her during informal conversations, apparently viewing her as a trusted confidant rather than a potential security threat. The systematic way she had exploited these relationships demonstrated a level of calculation and betrayal that was difficult to comprehend. The counterintelligence implications of her activities extended far beyond the immediate damage to British interests. Foreign intelligence services had gained unprecedented access to the decision-making processes of the royal family and senior government officials, potentially influencing policies and actions in ways that might never be fully understood. The ripple effects of her espionage would be felt for years as investigators attempted to trace the full extent of the information she had provided. As the confrontation entered its third hour, it became clear that Camilla had no intention of accepting responsibility for her actions or providing genuine cooperation with the investigation. Her primary focus remained on minimizing the consequences for herself, and she began making increasingly desperate offers to trade information about her handlers for more lenient treatment. The security team prepared to implement the next phase of the operation, which would involve her physical removal from the royal residence. The protocol was designed to be as dignified as possible while ensuring that security requirements were met and evidence was preserved. Her personal belongings would be searched for additional intelligence materials, and her access to communication devices would remain strictly controlled. Harrison explained that she would be given the opportunity to pack essential personal items under supervision, but that anything of potential intelligence value would be retained for examination. The search would be conducted by female officers to preserve her dignity, but it would be thorough and comprehensive to ensure that no evidence was destroyed or concealed. The legal process that would follow her removal was explained in detail. She would be formally arrested and charged with violations of the Official Secrets Act, conspiracy to commit espionage, and potentially treason depending on the final assessment of the damage caused by her activities. The evidence against her was sufficient to virtually guarantee conviction, and the sentences for such crimes could be severe. Camilla's final attempt to avoid the consequences of her actions involved threatening to reveal embarrassing information about royal family members to the media. She claimed to have documented evidence of personal scandals and constitutional irregularities that could damage the monarchy if made public. The threat was both pathetic and revealing, demonstrating that even in her final moments as queen consort, she was willing to betray the family that had trusted her. The threat of media exposure was taken seriously by the security team, but they had been prepared for such possibilities. Injunctions had already been prepared to prevent publication of classified information, and media outlets had been quietly informed that any publication of materials derived from espionage activities would face serious legal consequences. As the clock approached 2 in the morning, the time for negotiation and explanation had passed. Camilla's refusal to cooperate voluntarily had made her forcible removal inevitable, and the security team began implementing the procedures that would mark the end of her time as queen consort. The woman who had once been embraced by the public as a stabilizing influence on the royal family was about to be exposed as a traitor who had systematically betrayed the trust placed in her. The physical removal would be conducted with minimal force but maximum security, ensuring that she could not destroy evidence or alert accomplices to her compromised position. The night that had begun with hopes for voluntary cooperation was ending with the harsh reality of justice being imposed on someone who had chosen betrayal over loyalty, greed over duty, and personal gain over the welfare of the nation she had sworn to serve. The moment had arrived that everyone in the room had hoped to avoid, but Camilla's intransigence had made inevitable. Commander Welsh stepped forward and formally placed her under arrest, reading the charges that would forever mark her as one of the most significant traitors in British history. The words echoed strangely in the elegant apartment that had been her home as queen consort, transforming the space from a place of privilege into a crime scene. Her reaction to the formal arrest was a mixture of rage and calculation that revealed the true depths of her character. Rather than showing remorse or attempting to minimize the damage she had caused, Camilla immediately began making threats about the information she could reveal to damage the royal family and the government. Her words confirmed what the evidence had already suggested. She viewed her relationships with royal family members purely as sources of leverage rather than bonds of affection or loyalty. The physical process of her removal began with a systematic search of her apartment, conducted by specialist officers who had been trained in handling sensitive intelligence materials. Every piece of electronic equipment was carefully cataloged and secured for forensic examination, while documents and personal papers were reviewed for potential intelligence value. The search revealed additional evidence of her espionage activities, including encrypted storage devices that had been hidden in seemingly innocent locations. Detective Inspector Harrison coordinated the search with methodical precision, ensuring that proper legal procedures were followed while maintaining the security necessary to prevent any compromise of ongoing investigations. The apartment that had once represented the pinnacle of royal privilege was systematically dismantled as officers looked for any evidence that might have been overlooked in the initial investigation. The discovery of additional communication equipment confirmed the sophisticated nature of Camilla's espionage operation. Hidden within apparently innocent household items were devices that would have allowed her to maintain contact with her handlers even under circumstances where her primary communication methods were compromised. The level of preparation suggested that she had been thoroughly trained for the possibility of discovery and had been prepared to continue her activities even under increased scrutiny. Her personal belongings told the story of a lifestyle that had gradually become disconnected from the reality of her position. Expensive jewelry, designer clothing, and luxury accessories filled multiple wardrobes and storage areas, many items bearing price tags that would have represented months of income for ordinary citizens. The accumulation of material possessions seemed to have become an end in itself, feeding a compulsive need for acquisition that made her vulnerable to financial inducements from foreign intelligence services. The psychological profile that had been developed during the investigation became clearer as officers observed her behavior during the search process. Camilla displayed a remarkable ability to compartmentalize her emotions, maintaining an almost clinical detachment even as her life collapsed around her. This emotional control had undoubtedly served her well during her years as a double agent, allowing her to maintain her public persona while conducting activities that would have been impossible for someone with a normal emotional response to betrayal. Her attempts to negotiate continued even as officers prepared her for physical removal from the premises. She offered to provide detailed information about her intelligence handlers, claiming knowledge of other operations that were targeting British interests. But her credibility had been so thoroughly destroyed by her previous deceptions that even potentially valuable intelligence was viewed with extreme skepticism by the investigating officers. The legal team that had been assembled to handle her case faced unprecedented challenges in processing someone of her former status. The constitutional implications of prosecuting a queen consort for treason required careful coordination between the Crown Prosecution Service, the Attorney General's office, and palace legal advisors. The goal was to ensure that justice was served while minimizing the potential for constitutional crises that could damage the monarchy itself. As the search of her apartment neared completion, the time came for her physical removal from Windsor Castle. The protocol called for her to be escorted from the premises with the minimum force necessary to ensure compliance. But the security requirements demanded a level of restraint and control that would prevent any attempts at escape or evidence destruction. The route from her apartment to the waiting vehicle had been carefully planned to minimize exposure to palace staff and potential witnesses. The operation was conducted with the same level of security that would normally be reserved for protecting the royal family, rather than removing a threat from their midst. The irony was not lost on the officers involved that they were using procedures designed to protect the crown to remove someone who had systematically betrayed it. Camilla's departure from Windsor Castle marked the end of an era that had begun with such promise and hope. Her marriage to King Charles had been seen as a symbol of the monarchy's ability to adapt and evolve, incorporating someone who had once been viewed as an outsider into the very heart of the royal establishment. The revelation of her true nature transformed that narrative into one of betrayal and deception that would haunt the royal family for generations. The immediate aftermath of her removal required careful coordination between multiple agencies and departments. The security breach she represented had implications that extended far beyond the royal household, potentially affecting diplomatic relationships, intelligence operations, and government policies that had been developed with the assumption that classified information would remain secure. King Charles had been informed of the operation's completion through secure channels, but the emotional impact on him was expected to be severe and potentially long-lasting. The woman he had loved and trusted had systematically betrayed not just him personally, but everything he represented as monarch. The psychological trauma of such a betrayal would require careful management by medical professionals who understood the unique pressures facing members of the royal family. The media management strategy that had been developed to handle the inevitable revelation of Camilla's crimes would be tested in the coming days and weeks. The goal was to present the situation in a way that emphasized the effectiveness of security services in detecting and neutralizing threats while minimizing the damage to public confidence in the monarchy. The delicate balance between transparency and security would require careful navigation by communications professionals. The international implications of her espionage activities would require diplomatic efforts to repair relationships with allied nations whose trust had been violated by the security breach. Intelligence sharing arrangements that had taken decades to develop might need to be rebuilt from scratch, while ongoing operations could be compromised by the information she had provided to hostile services. The vehicle carrying Camilla away from Windsor Castle disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, taking with it someone who had once been among the most privileged people in the nation. Her destination was a secure facility where she would undergo extensive debriefing by counterintelligence specialists who would attempt to assess the full extent of the damage she had caused. The process would be lengthy and thorough, designed to extract every piece of information that might help repair the security breach she had created. William stood at his study window, watching the taillights disappear into the distance. The decision to order her removal had been the most difficult of his life, but he felt no regret about the necessity of protecting the crown from internal threats. The institution of monarchy had survived countless challenges throughout its long history, and it would survive this betrayal as well, but the personal cost to his family would be immeasurable. The dawn that was beginning to break over Windsor Castle marked not just the end of Camilla's time as queen consort, but the beginning of a new chapter in royal history. The lessons learned from her betrayal would inform security procedures for generations to come, while the emotional scars left by her deception would serve as permanent reminders of the price of misplaced trust. The guards who had carried out the operation returned to their posts, their faces reflecting the gravity of what they had witnessed. They had seen the fall of someone who had reached the pinnacle of British society, only to throw it all away for the temporary satisfaction of financial gain and the thrill of deception. The story of her downfall would become a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of power and the devastating consequences of betraying the trust of those who loved and supported her. In the years that would follow, historians and intelligence professionals would study her case as an example of how even the most trusted individuals could be turned against their own interests. The security measures that had failed to detect her activities would be strengthened and modernized, while the psychological screening of individuals with access to sensitive information would be enhanced to identify potential vulnerabilities before they could be exploited. The woman who had once been queen consort was now simply a prisoner facing the prospect of spending the rest of her life paying for her crimes. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and final. William's order had been carried out with the precision and effectiveness that the situation demanded, and justice would now take its course through the legal system that existed to protect the realm from all enemies, foreign and domestic. The crown endured, as it always had, while those who betrayed it faced the full consequences of their choices.